Lisa is not fighting for love here. She is paying an entry fee and praying somebody hands her love back at the end. Before this mess even reaches the priest, the ugly part is already clear. Every step in this relationship gets easier for Daniel once Lisa feels guilty, scared, and ready to spend. Welcome back to Sabrine Rose. Subscribe if you want smart drama without the fake fluff, and drop your take in the comments because this one gets darker the longer you sit with it. Why does forgiveness need cash in the first place? Why does Daniel suddenly look more secure once Lisa starts submitting to the process? And why does the ending land with this gross feeling that something got approved, but nothing got healed? That is the real hook here. On paper, this looks like a cleansing ritual. In practice, in my opinion, it looks like a relationship toll booth. Lisa does not arrive as somebody being loved through a crisis. She arrives as somebody being told, directly and indirectly, that acceptance has a price. Pay enough, obey enough, surrender enough, and maybe you get let back into the fantasy. That is why the scandal is not even the darkest part. The darkest part is the deal underneath it. Lisa is stuck in a setup where she keeps handing over money, pride, and peace of mind, hoping the reward at the end will be emotional security. But every new step proves the opposite. The more she gives, the less stable the relationship looks. The more afraid she gets, the more expensive the solution becomes. Daniel does not need to say all of this out loud. His role in the pattern is already sitting there in plain sight. Lisa is the one panicking. Lisa is the one reaching for approval. Lisa is the one opening her wallet. And once you clock that, the so-called cleanse stops looking spiritual and starts looking transactional. And the first stop on that transaction is not the temple, it is the market. The shopping trip kills any last bit of innocence in this story, because now the relationship starts showing its receipts. The priest wants yams, a goat, and cash, and suddenly love has a grocery list. Nothing says spiritual redemption like errands on a deadline. But this part matters, because money is no longer sitting in the background. Money starts exposing who feels pressure, who feels entitled, and who gets comfortable when the bill belongs to somebody else. Daniel moves through the market with far too much ease for a man spending cash that is not his. That is what jumps out. He does not come off confused. He does not come off overwhelmed. He comes off relaxed. Lisa is the one feeling the hit. Lisa is the one thinking about debt, the end of her trip, the shrinking budget, the fact that every new demand keeps landing on her side of the table. Meanwhile, Daniel is buying yams with a casual energy that would make a rich uncle proud. And once Lisa notices the price is not being pushed down hard enough, the mood shifts fast. Now she is not only paying for the ritual, she is paying for the feeling of being played in real time. Then comes the goat, which somehow manages to be both absurd and depressing. A tiny female goat gets added to the cart like one more emotional tax, and every object starts carrying extra weight. The yams are not yams anymore. They are proof of compliance. The goat is not a goat anymore. It is the cost of staying in the relationship. The cash is not cash anymore. It is fear in physical form. The nasty little question hiding under all this is simple. Is Daniel generous only when Lisa is funding the moment and cheap only when his own future gets touched? And worse, is this cleanse a one-time expense or the first invoice in a long series? Because after the yams, after the goat, after the cash stress, Lisa still has to stand in front of the priest and hope none of this was only the opening charge. This is the point where the story stops being about shopping and starts being about panic. Because once Lisa says out loud that if the cleanse fails, she loses Daniel forever, the whole thing clicks into place. The ritual is not driving her at this stage. Fear is. She is no longer weighing whether this makes sense. She is trying to stop a personal disaster before it swallows her whole. And when somebody reaches that state, logic usually loses the room. That is why bad arrangements get stronger the longer they go on. After enough money, enough embarrassment, enough tears, enough defending somebody who keeps putting you through chaos, walking away starts to feel more painful than staying. Not because staying is healthy, because leaving would force you to face what all of this cost. The money hurts. The wasted time hurts. The pride hurts. The bigger wound is admitting you kept feeding something that was draining you dry. For a lot of people, that truth feels heavier than one more humiliation. So they stay. They pay again. They bend again. They call survival hope. Lisa is making bad choices. No need to baby that. She keeps stepping deeper into a setup that keeps asking more from her than from Daniel. But this is also bigger than one woman making foolish moves. The machine around her feeds on those moves. Every uncle, every warning, every ritual demand, every threat of rejection pushes her toward one conclusion. Keep going or lose everything. That is how pressure systems work. They do not need perfect victims. They need frightened people who still want the prize. And the prize here is not even peace. It is permission. Permission to keep the relationship alive. Permission to feel chosen. Permission to believe all this pain still leads somewhere worth reaching. That is why this part lands so hard. Lisa is not walking toward the priest with confidence. She is walking toward him like somebody headed into an exam where the grade decides her future. Her nerves are shot. Her money is already bleeding out. Her dignity is hanging by a thread. And when she gets close enough to face the priest, her body tells the truth before her mouth does. She wants to run. The priest does not enter this scene like a calm guide. He hits it like a man who already knows fear will do half the work for him. The shouting starts early. The silence gets forced. The goat is bleeding. Lisa is already rattled before a single answer reaches her. And that matters, because this scene is not built to soothe anyone. This whole room feels arranged to crush her focus and raise her dependence. If you keep somebody nervous enough, they stop questioning and start complying. Then the ritual energy gets louder. The commands get sharper. The room gets stranger. The priest speaks to the oracle, takes a hard drink, then sprays the liquid out into the space like a warning shot from another planet. Lisa is sitting there scared stiff, trying to process what is happening while every new move makes the ground feel less stable. So, ask the obvious question. Who needed this atmosphere more? The gods or the people trying to control the room? And why does each new act leave Lisa with less space to think for herself? That is the point. The shouting does a job. The silence does a job. The drink does a job. The spraying does a job. None of this is random noise inside the scene. Every part turns pressure up another notch. Lisa is not being guided toward clarity. Lisa is being pushed into overload. And once a person hits overload, authority starts looking bigger than reason. By the time the priest starts reading the room, Lisa is no longer trying to understand the ritual. She is trying to survive it. Then comes the turn. The priest announces a taboo. Not a mistake, not confusion, not a misunderstanding. A taboo. One heavy word, and now the room has a target. The blame does not stay floating for long either. Bit by bit, the focus tightens. The accusation starts moving in one direction. Straight at Lisa. This is where the scene stops feeling strange and starts feeling ugly. Up to now, Lisa has been pressured, rattled, and squeezed. Here, she gets morally stripped down in public. Her past relationships, her marriages, her unfinished divorce, even the shape of her personal history, all get pulled into a space where she is no longer being heard as a person. She is being examined like a problem somebody wants stamped and sorted. And the cold part is how fast the verdict seems ready. Lisa does not walk into an open conversation. She walks into a setup where her past is already being framed as stain, offense, and spiritual dirt. That is why this part lands harder than the shouting or the ritual theater. Fear can shake you. Shame can reorganize you from the inside. Once somebody accepts the idea that parts of who they are make them unworthy, approval stops being a gift and starts feeling like survival. That is the deeper cruelty here. She is not being pushed to reflect on one bad choice. She is being pushed to treat her own history like contamination. And once that happens, the person with power gets to sell relief back to her. Not love. Not peace. Relief. Temporary permission to stop feeling filthy. To be fair, this is not about mocking faith, tradition, or culture as a whole. That would be lazy, and lazy commentary is for people who think volume is intelligence. The problem in this scene is the power play. The problem is the way authority gets used to pin one person under a moral label, then turn that pressure into leverage. Lisa's vulnerability is doing half the labor, and the ritual is doing the rest. The room is no longer asking whether Lisa wants acceptance. The room is testing how much of herself she will bury to get it. And once the shame has done its work, the next move comes in like clockwork. The gods, the oracle, the ritual, all of it circles back to the same earthly demand. Cash. More of it. Inside the ceremony now, not outside, the first big payment comes due now. The story shows its hand even more clearly. Because money is no longer sitting beside the ritual. Money is the ritual. And Daniel's reaction gives away more than he probably wants. Back in the market, he moved with a loose wrist when Lisa's cash was buying yams and goats. He looked relaxed then. He looked like a man spending from a pool he assumed would stay open. But the second the priest wants cash inside the ceremony, his energy changes. He tightens up. He drags his feet. He looks less like a believer in the process and more like a man watching his own cut shrink in real time. That shift matters. A lot. Because it kills the soft excuse that Daniel is only some passive bystander getting pulled along by family pressure and ritual custom. No. He reads the room well enough to know when spending helps him and when spending threatens him. When the money is buying movement toward marriage, he goes with it. When another man starts reaching into the same stream of resources, his discomfort shows up fast. That is not confusion. That is territory. And then Lisa does the saddest thing in the whole exchange. She overrides her own self-protection. Fear has climbed so high by this point that she is no longer guarding her budget, her dignity, or even her common sense. She is pushing for the payment to go through. She wants the pocket emptied. She wants the ritual satisfied. She wants the machine fed. Because in her mind, the greater danger is not losing money. The greater danger is losing Daniel. That is how bad setups keep winning. They train one person to treat sacrifice like safety. The more frightened Lisa gets, the more willing she becomes to bankroll the process, crushing her. Every note handed over feels like insurance against abandonment. Every demand met feels like one more chance to stay chosen. And once fear starts reading the bill, people stop asking what something costs and start asking what happens if they refuse. So the yams go over, the goat goes over, the cash goes over. One by one, every demanded item ends up where the power already was. And with all of it finally in the priest's hands, the room is ready for the next stage. Not forgiveness. Ownership. Then, the ritual stops feeling like a test and starts feeling like a contract. The priest brings out the statues, and suddenly this is no longer about whether Lisa can be forgiven for her past. Now it is about what she has to surrender for her future. That shift is the heart of the whole story. Up to this point, the money bought access. This moment goes deeper. This is where approval asks for permanent terms. The statues matter because they turn pressure into symbol. Lisa is not only being told to stay with Daniel, she is being told to bind herself to one approved version of life and seal it in front of everybody. That is why the forever language hits so hard. Forever is not romantic in this scene. Forever is a lock. Forever is the word people use when they want a frightened person to stop thinking and exits. And then comes the line that changes the air in the room. No man, no woman. No man, no woman. That is not some throwaway ritual phrase floating around for atmosphere. That is total restriction dressed up as cleansing. It takes Lisa's entire emotional and personal future and narrows it down to one single permitted track. There is no room left for uncertainty, change, regret, or self-discovery. There is only obedience with a spiritual label stuck on top. That is what makes this moment bigger than a strange reality TV scene. This is not only about Lisa saying yes to Daniel. This is about Lisa being pushed to treat devotion as proof of purity. The price of being accepted is no longer cash alone. Now the price is exclusivity, identity, and the right to define her own future. She has to kiss the symbol. She has to repeat the promise. She has to perform surrender so the room can call it healing. And once forgiveness starts demanding lifelong devotion, you are not watching mercy anymore. You are watching ownership put on ceremonial clothes. By the time the vow lands, Lisa is overwhelmed. You can feel the weight of it catching up with her all at once. The money, the shame, the fear, the pressure, all of it pours into this one moment. She starts getting emotional. And that is when the ritual gets ready to tighten the screws again. Then comes the line that reveals the whole setup for what it is. If she misbehaves, they will come after her. There it is. The bond is no longer being held together by trust, care, or even plain old manipulation. Now the glue is threat. Cosmic threat, no less, because apparently earthly control was not enough. And this is where scared people get trapped even harder. Outsiders love to ask why somebody does not pull away once things get this extreme. Because fear does not always make people run. Fear often makes people cling. If the punishment feels huge and the relationship feels like the only reward left on the table, people hold on tighter. Not because the situation got safer, because their mind starts treating compliance like protection. That is what makes this part so rough to watch. Lisa is not standing there looking free. She is standing there trying to survive the consequences of getting this wrong. The threat does not open her eyes. It corners her. And once somebody feels cornered enough, even absurd demands start looking like the safest option in the room. The darker this ritual gets, the more Lisa mistakes obedience for security. Then the ritual moves to the goat, because of course this ordeal still has one more symbolic turn left in it. The final act plays out, the wrapper comes off, and with one last ceremonial move the verdict arrives. Lisa is told she is forgiven, cleansed, accepted. The room treats it like release. But the uneasy part hangs in the air. Nothing about this looked like freedom. It looked like fear doing its job. And this is where the scene turns from intense to sinister, because Lisa comes out feeling lighter. She is relieved. She thinks the worst is over. She thinks peace has finally shown up. But from the outside, this is the moment where the audience should start feeling sick. Because the cleanse did not repair anything. It did not build trust. It did not solve the imbalance. It did not expose truth and clear the air. All it did was bless the same relationship after Lisa paid for the privilege in cash, shame, and obedience. That is the irony cutting through this whole ending. Lisa feels free right after a process that asked her to hand over more of herself than ever. She feels accepted right after being told her history needed cleansing. She feels safe right after being pushed through fear. So her relief is real, but it is built on something rotten. She is not celebrating healing, she is celebrating re-entry into the same arrangement that kept hurting her. Then Daniel changes. Watch that carefully, because his warmth matters more than any speech. He gets softer once the road to marriage opens up again. Once the ancestors are satisfied, once the threat is cleared, once the ritual gives the relationship its stamp, his affection rises. That should not read like romance. That should read like evidence. The approval process works, and suddenly he is back in boyfriend mode. The love gets sweeter the second the obstacle disappears, and that is exactly what makes it hard to trust. So now they are smiling, talking like the future is alive again, acting as if this whole brutal detour brought them closer. And that is what makes the scene so ugly in its sweetness. Everything looks calm. Everything sounds fine. Everything feels wrong. So now we end where the story began, with one nasty contradiction sitting in the middle of everything. Why does Lisa walk away relieved after something so punishing? Because the ritual never had to make her free. It only had to make her feel safe enough to stay. That is the difference. And once you see that, every strange detail stops looking random and starts looking connected. The goat was not random. It turned forgiveness into a transaction you could hold in your hands. The cash was not random. It measured submission in real time. The vow was not random. It took acceptance and tied it to lifelong restriction. Daniel's warmth at the end was not random either. His softness rises the second the road ahead opens back up. Piece by piece, the whole thing points in one direction. Lisa is not being restored. Lisa is being reattached. That is why the ending feels so wrong even while she looks happy. She thinks the cleanse solved the problem. In truth, the cleanse solved the inconvenience. It got the relationship moving again without fixing the rot inside it. And for Lisa, that is enough, because the other option is unbearable. If she admits what this all was, then she has to face the money, the shame, the fear, the begging, the self-erasure, all of it, and admit she paid a brutal price to protect a fantasy that never protected her back. She leaves calling it peace because the truth would cost her more than the ritual already did. That is the sting. Some people do not choose what feels healthy. They choose what lets them avoid emotional collapse for one more day. Lisa leaves lighter not because she found freedom, but because compliance gave her temporary relief. And temporary relief is dangerous when you start mistaking it for love. And the ugly part is this was never the final answer. This was only the fee for staying in the story. Because once a relationship teaches you to buy back your place in it, the next chapter is never about whether the damage is over. The next chapter is about how much worse the price gets once both people know you are still willing to pay.